So, like, what do you think about the merit of, or do you think there is a lot
This
of
is gonna
merit
start off
in?
on such a bad foot. Like, why can't we? Can you take this seriously for once in your life?
I'm being dead serious. No one just says the word merit and takes a shit and
No,
like
you
isn't
do though.
serious.
You do. I know you.
You
You're
don't know me
playing
well
checkers.
enough.
I'm moving the pieces around. Okay.
You do not know me well enough,
People
clearly.
people don't understand that, but I am moving the pieces around. I'm not just making moves.
I'm a different man, dude. It's 2020.
No, you're not.
Don't think of me as that man at
Everyone thinks they're
Ryerson.
different. Everyone starts with the same computer that they developed in the first 5 years of their life, and they don't acknowledge that that's what's calling the shots.
Okay, well, do you think there's merit to going back and watching old videos, old movies? Like I've been like going back and watching old stuff with my girlfriend.
Humble
Watch True
brag.
Romance, classic movie from the 90s. Like, do you think it's worth it to go back and like watch that stuff and like learn from it, even if you're like a digital content creator?
Here's what I think about that. I think it's very in vogue to say that you like analog media, whether that's a magazine, whether it's a classic movie, especially with like marketing Twitter. I don't know. You don't use Twitter at all, so you wouldn't really understand the reference. And I hope I'm not being too niche. But yesterday, everyone was dumping on Quibi because Quibi lasted all of 6 months with their 1.75 billion in funding. And hey, guess what? They're done. But my initial point was like, I think it's very like hipster and cool to say, oh, I watch Tarantino. Oh, I watch Spielberg. I read the classics. But while there is merit to what you can learn from that in terms of cinematography and editing and kind of stylistic, I think that we're moving away from that as a format in terms of what we're seeing on digital, which definitely wasn't the case when we started because I think that that style was something that a lot of filmmakers and video creators aspired to do, to make it like very cinematic and like beautiful in that certain aesthetic.
Well, specifically about True Romance, like it didn't have that beautiful cinematic sense. It was more of like a character driven film where like you're following these two people. It's a man and a woman. They kind of fall in love. It's like a Bonnie and Clyde, like man and woman versus the world, and like kind of like fighting people. And like just kind of like a journey thriller as well. What I'm speaking more on is like the way the dialogue's presented, the storytelling elements, the pacing, how they lit the scenes. Like I feel like these are all elements I can put into my work at least. And also understanding like like what was like fashion like and the way people talked like back then. I feel like it kind of gives you more context to like the history of people, and then you can implement old with new. Like we talked about this in previous episodes. You go back in time to a certain period of time, whatever it is, that's relatively close to where we are right now. We see it in fashion. The 90s is kind of big and popping. So like going back and watching 90 movies, does that not help you become more aware of why things are more popular now, or how you can bring old back and make it new?
I mean, yeah, there's definitely some merit there. Here's what I think that is useful to consider. A lot of um, a lot of the things they do in terms of pacing and style, it works really well when you have that 2 hour format to kind of let that story breathe. Um, so on the one hand, yes, you can kind of look at that medium and say like, oh, this works really well, or I like how this kind of pacing and dialogue worked, or I like how they put those shots together. But you also have to consider that like you are creating for a wildly different medium today, and while you can kind of take pieces and bits of their aesthetic, ultimately you have to make it work in a setting where the conditions are completely different. Why don't you jump in? I want to grab a quote from your boy Ty Rogers, somebody that we talk about a lot behind the scenes, because I think he had this really interesting take on kind of what vertical and mobile video is doing to cinematography. Here it is right here. Okay. So he writes, social media vertical video is honestly killing good cinematography. Dash, I 100% believe this. Vertical video, especially when shot on a long lens, shows zero, in all caps, zero perspective in storytelling. Perspective also helps create depth in our image, among many other things. I want your immediate reaction to that, because that's a hot take.
I agree, because when you have horizontal, you get rule of thirds. You can show a lot more in the scene. Um, if you're doing just vertical, like it's pretty much just a portrait of whatever the subject you're shooting is. You can't really get much leading room, whether it's in front of the person or behind the person. You don't get much grand scale of where they are in the scene they're in. It's kind of, but the thing is, I think that works with sports. Like I like having these ISO shots of the players, but I agree with what he's saying. But I like difference. I like when there's change. Like not everyone does vertical on social. I think a lot of people do, but there's still a lot of guys who make IGTVs that are horizontal where you can, click the little button and it rotates it. I like both. And I don't know if he's arguing to get rid of it or that it shouldn't be as prominent or like people should slow down on it. But I don't know. I see merit in both. You can still create depth in vertical. And I think it just adds another layer to filmmaking, in my opinion.
So here's a kind of good point to pick up on. How long have you been doing vertical video for?
About a year, I'd
About a
say.
year?
And
That's
it's
what I would
fun. It's more of
benchmark
a
it
it's a
as.
I think it's a little bit more challenging at times. But I think when you look at the depth of possibilities and potential in vertical, I just think it doesn't even touch horizontal. Because horizontal gives you more abilities to rack focus, fill the frame more, show scale, whether it's large or it's very small. Like when you're like doing like a very extreme close up ISO of some sort of subject, whatever you're showing, you can incorporate more detail and more story in that frame when it's horizontal. And I find most importantly, I find the biggest struggle I run into with vertical is when I have a wide shot, like I'm establishing a scene, I'm showing, how, like, for example, in basketball, I want the whole court shot and like one point guard, let's say he's dribbling slowly, calling a play. I want to be able to show a wide shot of the whole court with his back facing me, looking at the net, looking at the people running and doing routes and plays. You can't do that vertical because you can't show the full scale of the court. So I think that for me is the biggest struggle. But there's ways to creatively get around it, whether you stack triple frames, um, or you stack double. I'm not sure. Like there's ways around it, but I like the challenge it provides and it offers.
So you talked about a couple things there. Let's maybe unpack those a little bit. What do you think when you started? Were you talking about stacking frames and kind of changing what the actual content of the scene looks like? What were kind of the initial challenges when you kind of first got into it? There was like, okay, now I don't have all this room. Kind of how do I navigate that and still tell a compelling story?
I think it starts when you shoot because a lot of times I'll go into a shoot knowing I'm going vertical. So I have my grid lineup and I have a grid where it shows me where the 4:5 aspect ratio is and I shoot pretty much everything within that and I keep that in mind the whole time. Um, but I guess the way you get around it is like for example, I did this work with a client for their gym, and they wanted to talk about how much square footage they have. They want that in their videos, but they also wanted vertical social media video. So I thought, how can I show this? And I thought I'll just take several wide shots of their whole space of different machines, different areas, and then I thought when I do put the text on screen showing the size, I'm going to stack them on top of each other so it's the full aspect ratio, 16:9. They're just on top of each other, and you get to see the full scale, and you get to see two images of their scale rather than just the one image on vertical or rather horizontal. And then I have to cut. It's kind of a weird jump cut. Whereas that, it kind of looked cool. They're like moving back and forth in different directions while on top, and it gives you more information in less time. So there is a benefit to it. Although I guess it is smaller, so it's harder. You have to look closer with your phone, but I think we're all used to that, our age group. Like we're already so close to our phone, so I don't think it matters that much.
I had an interesting comment before we started where I basically said that you are more like a millennial than you are like me, Gen Z. So in terms of where this is going in the future, it's kind of interesting to think about the demand for these videos. Like really outside of YouTube, which you started doing recently, which is horizontal, I look at something like the success of TikTok, and that's all mobile video. In terms of like clients in the future, do you see there being more of a demand for vertical video, or do you see it as being something that's kind of something like we're definitely kind of in the early stages of this vertical video? Does it get bigger? Does it kind of disappear? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I find I'm pitching vertical video. to these clients, because a lot of the clients, people have the money, the businesses, they're not very old. They don't really get, or sorry, they're not very young. They don't really get it, and they don't get like the merit to vertical. So the number one thing I think with vertical personally is when you shoot not a 1:1 aspect ratio, but a 4:5, when you're scrolling through your phone on Instagram, or scrolling through Instagram on your phone, you want that image, whatever's on your page, to take up as much of the screen as possible so people don't get distracted by what's below or above it. So if you're just doing a horizontal video, you're already seeing a post from the guy before and a guy after, and you might get distracted as a viewer and go straight down, skip something that's smaller. So the bigger the better, take up as much real estate as possible. And also it just shows more of it's a larger image of what you're trying to show, and people are going to be it's going to be easier for them to see what it is. So I think I'm constantly pitching to them, do vertical. It's taking more real estate online. It's easier for your clients and people that you're trying to sell to see what you're selling. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just only going to increase over time, because you look at, I think the number is on Netflix, like over 50% of people watch the shows on their phone.
Which is
Everything's moving
crazy.
phone.
When's the last time that you watched Netflix on your phone? 'Cause
I don't
for
do that.
me, like years maybe. Like when it first came out, I thought it was really cool, but now I'm like, why would I just not like do this on my TV?
I watch a lot of YouTube on my phone though.
Yeah, I'm in the
And
same boat there.
and what's weird is I kind of like sometimes when I'm on YouTube and it's a vertical video and it's like full
Yeah,
screen.
you get they're very uncommon, but you get them. So I see them most of the time with ads actually. Like I don't see many vertical videos, but they do a lot of vertical ads, and I'm like, oh wait, like this experience is so much better. If you actually look at how much the video takes up on your screen when you're on YouTube on mobile, it's like maybe it's a third. Like, and it goes back to the point that like YouTube's the second biggest search engine in the world, so it's obviously massive. But you look back at the platform's roots, and it was made for desktop, and it's still like an extension of desktop,
I think
which is weird.
it doesn't make sense to go vertical completely on YouTube. And you look at Gary Vee did an experiment one summer. I think it was when IGTV first came out. What was that, 2 years ago? And he's like, I'm going to start doing all my daily V's on YouTube vertical and just see what happens. Because I want to see if this is like what people need on YouTube. Because he saw the stats. Most people are on mobile watching it. Should I transition to vertical? He eventually went back to horizontal. It didn't work. So I think you see there, like that's a guy who's very adaptive and with the times and moves where his audience is moving. So clearly I think if we just look at that case study, it makes sense to go horizontal on YouTube. But when I look at, Twitter, Instagram, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if your video is under a minute to go horizontal.
I would agree.
And I think
definitely
everyone's
agree.
moving that way as a consumer because it's just easier to consume. Stop giving me barriers of entry to like learn your story, to integrate myself in the idea you're trying to share. Like no one wants to like zoom in. Like, when you see a horizontal video and you're like zooming in with your fingers, like I kind of just want it to be my full screen. I just hold it
I don't want to
casually.
think. I think it goes back to that. Like, if I'm on social media and I'm consuming, like, I don't think most people are in a mind space where like I want to think and I want to like do a bunch of things to like get the optimal experience. It's almost like the expectation is that the content that we're consuming has to be optimized from the jump.
And like if I'm going to take that and transition to YouTube and what I'm doing, this video I just shot it, I'm editing it now. It's playing on this idea of long form media that provides a lot of value without me like overly talking. And it's similar to, I don't know if you've seen those 30 minutes of street photography POV. And it's just a guy with a GoPro on just taking photos photos out on the streets. So I thought, okay, so I get to see this guy's process. He takes the photo on the video, then he posts the edited version, and you kind of get to see like what goes into it. You get pulled behind the curtain, and it's not like he's like walking you through. He's like, hey guys, like welcome here, we're gonna do this. He's literally just like going up to a random guy. He's like, I love like your jacket, let me take a picture. Like, and then he just takes a portrait, edits it, puts on the video, and then moves to the next thing. I was thinking, why don't I I've had some people reach out, like do a color grading tutorial video. I'm like, why don't I just do a 30 minutes of color grading where I color grade like 3-4 clips, whatever it is, I forget. And I just film myself doing it with a screen recording where one half of the screen is me like working at it. You see like what I'm like working. And then the other half is you get to see a live updating version of the image preview and then the Lumetri panel. So I just thought like I'm gonna post a 30-minute video like this. I'm not necessarily teaching, but you're sitting in with a session.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's so easily consumable. You put on the background, and I'm just gonna put like lo-fi music, and it's something I think you can just watch at any speed. You know, two times speed playback, 1.5, whatever, and you get to see someone who maybe you look up to color grading wise, and you're learning from them. I don't know how many people look up to me, but I think I'm half decent, and this is a way to like learn almost like you're a fly on the wall. So I want to see where this goes. I don't know if it's gonna, be popular, but I looked it up. No one does color grading for like 30 minutes straight. So, I mean, it's interesting to see how my videos are reacting and to like the consumer public. Like I'm not sure how to exactly attract attention properly. It's really difficult. And I don't know if I should be promoting more tutorials or doing more tips or bite-sized pieces like what do you think makes a guy like Peter McKinnon, Daniel Schiffer like blow up so quick?
What do I think? What do I think made them blow up so quick? Is that
Yeah,
the
or make
question?
people blow up. Like I just don't. I've been at it for like 7 weeks. It just feels like it's tough to grow.
I think that's pretty common. In terms of their specific use cases, I think that they were kind of an example of somebody doing something unexpected at the right time, where online education was definitely moving that way into kind of free places. YouTube's the best example of that. So instead of just posting their work, I think these guys realized that there was a huge opportunity to kind of share what they know. Um, and then in terms of your case, I think it's really interesting to think about if you're gonna do long form, right? I think what people hesitate with, what we've hesitated with the podcast, is that it is a commitment where the average person who's not into cinematography, not into color grading and editing, like they are not your audience to begin with. But I think at the beginning, because of kind of who you know and how these platforms are set up, like you are really incentivized to follow the people that you know in real life and kind of support the work that they're doing. I think that's great. But if you look at kind of who is going to really move the needle and who would get the most value out of that video, you're talking about somebody who's completely different. Maybe they're not using social media just as a tool to kind of interact and communicate with their friends online, but they're really using it as a place to kind of learn and get value from other people with their careers and with their craft. And so long form is really interesting when you think about it, because at one end it kind of polarizes the people who see the video, and the average person's like, there's no way that I'm clicking on this 30-minute video, like it's not worth my time. Whereas you look at the other end of the barbell and you have that new creator, or that person that's just learning how to do photographs and how to do video, and they're like, oh my god, this is the perfect video for me. Like this is what I want to see kind of how he approaches color editing, how like what the specific things that he does to make his images look good. And you can get that in that like 2 to 5 minute video where you kind of just run through your technique. But I think the authenticity of doing a 30-minute video where you're unedited, you're kind of explaining your thought process in real time, I think that's the kind of content that people really connect to. And that kind of goes back to this idea of I think with Gen Z and everyone that has come after us, there has been this huge shift from, I think YouTube 1.0 was really people creating videos and adding a lot of production value and kind of adding their own shtick to it, where with these newer generations, I think people are becoming so much more comfortable with really being kind of authentic, almost like you're on a FaceTime call with them, where it's like the camera doesn't always have to be on you. Like it could be pointed up at the ceiling. It could be like a conversation that you're just having with your friends. And that's where if you do something that's a bit more unedited and raw and not polished, I think that's where you're going to see people really understand you, Will J, not as a professional and not as a video creator, but you, Will J, as the person, which is really interesting. Because at the end of the day, I think people follow people. The value, the utility and value that you provide in terms of like the knowledge and the subject expertise with video is great. And I think that's what's going to kind of drive people to that video. But at the end of the day, I think they're going to stick around because they want to see who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm. And it makes me think. I I love these guys like Matt Davella and I forget this other guy. He's a bald guy. Does like personal growth videos as well.
Self-help YouTube.
As much as it gets a little bit preachy and cringy, I do enjoy like the filmmaking aspect of it and the monologuing and the VO with like stock footage or footage that they've shot. And I'm thinking like, I kind of think I should do a little like similar to what you write about in your articles that we haven't talked about in this podcast yet, but I mean we'll talk about that later, what you've done. Like I've read a few and I'm like, this would be a good YouTube video just to talk about, even if it's coming from a guy who's like a video outward facing YouTuber where I'm just talking about, you know, how to do what I do. I think it'd be good to mix it up, you know, explain like my story a bit, like why you think going to film school or media school is a good thing. Because most people say don't do it, you know, like and do a little short film about it. Get creative. Take elements from videos or rather movies that I've watched, like I saw Glorious Bastards and Tarantino as a director and just general creator. Like he lets scenes and images and storytelling elements like sit. He doesn't just bang, 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 jump. It's like when there's something impactful, like there's a rich pause. There's maybe a sound effect that accentuates it, or there's reactions from the actors that there's just a feeling of like deep storytelling through almost near perfect pacing that's similar to real life, and it's not this like action movie that's kind of rushing through things.
Your 1 minute sports edit hype
1
video.
minute sports edit. So I think there's a way. I think I need to do more journalistic or journal type videos about myself and let people connect through personality. But then, you know, I say that and I like that idea, but when I study a lot of these YouTubers who, you know, make it big or get a nice audience of whatever, 80,000+ subscribers, they always have one video that blows up. Mm-hmm. And it's like 10 tips to do this, or like some clickbaity BuzzFeed type video that's like the quiz or whatever. So the question is, do you try to search in your brain for ideas to make that viral sensation, or do you just consistently make things and establish a brand that's consistent through and just increase volume? So like, is it better to increase volume of what you're already doing or search to make that viral sensation? Because it is a searching process to find virality. Like, it's not like Peter McKinnon with his 8 camera tricks was just like, oh, this is like on my brand. It's like, no, like that's gonna blow up. I think he knew that that's a pretty big idea.
So, I mean, there's so much in that to unpack, really. I think that you're kind of, so let's kind of start at the high level. I think that when people think about making content, I think the most common thing that I hear from friends that maybe aren't don't have the technical background, and even from my friends that have a skill and they're like, okay, I want to do something, I want to teach this skill. I think the most common way that people misunderstand this is they look at it through this kind of lens that making content online is this perfectly efficient market, and that, what does that mean? So perfectly efficient market, right? It's this theory that if something's been shared already, it's not worth sharing again. And I don't really think that's true. I'll use Bleacher Report as an example because I was listening to a podcast with their founder, and they came around in the early 2010, kind of that time frame, at a time where you had all these sports networks that were already established, right? Like you had the ESPN and the Fox Sports of the world, and they were crushing it. But if you were a consumer and you went onto their website, they would only be showing you game times and stats to kind of drive you back to that broadcast experience, because that's where they're making all their money. So Bleacher Report comes in and they're like, well, we don't want to focus on the box score. Instead, we're going to kind of look at the stories behind the sport. We're going to kind of look at the culture of sports, and we're going to post all of our content online. So I think the lesson there is that even if you think something has been shared, and I think that's kind of the motivating thought behind all of this. I think everyone, whether they explicitly or implicitly say it, there is that kind of, well, it's already been shared, like what kind of value do I bring? And what you have to really remember here is that like no one can kind of tell a story like you, because you are bringing your unique perspective and your experience onto that story. So whether it's doing something that's purely utility, as Peter McKinnon kind of I remember that video where it was what was it, like 10
It's like
camera
eight
tricks?
camera tips or camera
Yeah, in
tricks
60 seconds.
and something like that. Like,
It was crazy for the time because like no one had thought of that. It's a perfect example that you could have that kind of story frame of, okay, in this video, I want to get out my 8 best camera tricks, but there's a whole, like, you could approach that an infinite amount of ways where it's like, okay, I'm going to just talk on camera. I'm going to try that, see if it works. Or I'm going to show me editing, like you said, with this concept with the color grading thing that maybe is 30 minutes, a bit more long form, a bit more unedited, so they kind of see my perspective and they see my personality. Or you could go the complete other direction and you can make this really highly produced, snappy, short video in a minute. And at that time, again, we go back to the context of it. Like, no one was doing that. There was no other video like that existed. So that's an example of kind of leveraging his unique skills, his personality, and then kind of packaging that in a way that hasn't been done before. And, that example really took off because I think the format really, really was unexpected and something that hadn't been done before. But there's an example, there are examples out there right now where you could kind of apply the same filter of, even if something has been done, it hasn't been done in a certain way, and you could package it and kind of put your unique spin on it where it's not the same video, even if it has the same concept.
also at that time, I was partaking or participating in some Minecraft play in that time of my life, and I remember looking up this. I think it was a trend at the time. It was 2017. He posted that video. I remember looking up like how to do this thing in the game, and there was a slew of videos, like millions of views. Okay, like I didn't realize how big Minecraft was on YouTube with the kids, and a lot of them were like how to build these things or like building 10 of these things in 2 minutes. Like it was all these videos similar to Peter McKinnon where they drop all this knowledge and all this value, ideas for you to take and put into your own game in a certain period of time that's snappy, and it's like, cut well to the music, and people get a lot of knowledge in a short period of time that's not really deep, it's quite shallow, you know? And I think I just got an idea actually for a YouTube video. I'm like, why not just do like 10 lighting tricks in like 60 seconds? I don't know if that's something that's been done before, but it gives people a bite-sized idea of what they could do and what and then maybe they ask you a question. Oh, can you show us exactly how you do that at a high level? Actually explain how to do it. So it's almost like not only a way to get viewership, but it's also an on-ramp onto more content that's in depth, which some people desire. There's a certain share of the market that desires that.
I want to stop and kind of bookmark on Onramp. I think if you are any kind of new consumer business, and a lot of the time when you think of content businesses or what you're trying to do with YouTube, I don't think the average person thinks of that as a business. But at the end of the day, you do that for a year and you maybe catch on 1,000 new followers, and that keeps building and compounding over time. Well, in 2 to 5 years, or even less than that, like that could be a legitimate business. Like you look at Peter McKinnon, he has 1 million followers now. Like that is a huge he on the back of the content that he publishes, like that is a huge business that he's running right now, like in the millions and millions of dollars every year. So let's start there. What I wanted to bookmark though is this concept of on ramp. I think that we've talked before that short form content is a great on ramp to our longer content, but I think that whatever kind of business or side hustle thing that you're doing, being really intentional and kind of thinking through the best ways to on ramp people onto your content is kind of the thing in my mind that would really separate the average person kind of creating content from the internet from people that are trying to take this a bit more seriously. And I think kind of the highest leverage thing that you can do is being really smart about trying to on ramp and ladder people up to your longer form content.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you do that through these like clickbaity short form pieces, like we've been talking, like learn these things or like these 10 things in 10 seconds. And like it's like playing on like alliteration too, or like playing on like the numbers matching and
Hmm.
whatnot. I think it's the
Being
best
really
way.
smart with your YouTube titles, like that's something that I think a lot of people kind of disregard. But again, if you think about how people are discovering your videos, if you are not doing like I think the the kind of hands-made tale on YouTube, and this could be completely wrong, so maybe fact check me on this, but it's anywhere between like 1,000 and 5,000 views that like at a certain point at that level you get picked up in YouTube's algorithm, and that's kind of the lockstep jump between getting kind of your average like 100 to 500 views and then really getting picked up in the algorithm and being shown to millions of people.
Exactly. I actually watched a recent video about frame rates by a guy, Danny Gevirtz, and I like his channel. I like it. It's pretty good. And I watched his videos. I learned a lot. But he posts this video like 24 frames a second versus 60, and I watched it. I'm like, this isn't the best like video. He kind of stumbles over some words. Like he doesn't really go in that depth. It's a bit sloppy, he's saying ums and uhs. But it got like 600,000 views, and it clearly provided people with a lot of value, and people loved it. And I'm like, wow, it's like I think I have some videos of equal quality to that, but they have like whatever 100 views. It's like you just never know when that tornado of the algorithm that's moving through the cyberspace and throughout their website, like you just don't know when it's going to pick you up, and maybe one day, it happens. And I was actually talking to my friend. I'm like, oh, it's like 7 weeks now of YouTube videos. It's like kind of like it's tough to stay consistent and like feel good when you're getting a certain amount of views. He's like, dude, but think about it. It's like an investment. Like you're uploading one, and it's going to be there forever, accruing views, accruing likes and comments. It's like you just don't know when that's actually going to get more and more views and like compound over time. Like it's just really be patient, keep uploading, never stop, because you don't know when one's going to go viral. And when one goes viral and you have a catalog, that's when you would get an audience.
Mm-hmm.
Catalog is almost just as important as having something with one video with a lot of views,
Mm-hmm.
or it's the most important. How many guys do we see have a one-hit wonder but they don't have a catalog? Like we talked about this with Chris when we talked about that artist on TikTok. Like he just didn't have a catalog after that huge number one hit, and he withered away.
Where are people going to go after that? You're almost like having the video that gets into the algorithm is kind of step one, but if there's no place for that fan to go after, you effectively did your job in the sense that you got that video and you kind of captured their interest, which is like step one for converting somebody from this kind of like average potential fan into like somebody who's going to be subscribing to your channel. Well, if there's no backlog after that, like you said, they're like, well, there's nowhere to go with that attention, and like that person's going to move on and kind of look for someone else. So another kind of important thing to think about with Burnout, I kind of want to steer the direction, the conversation there. So I've been wrestling. I think both of us have been wrestling with this idea of being original in terms of putting out content. So, my question to you is, how do you balance if you do a video and maybe it doesn't do so well? You're like, this concept didn't really stick. I have to think of something new. How do you really balance that out with, okay, but at the same time, like I just started this, and maybe it's not that the concept or the information in the video was bad. Maybe it was just the bad timing. I think that if I think of fringe ideas with audience building, I think there's tons of value with going back on old videos that you've done and really kind of extracting the best information. And then, like we said, with, you can kind of package information a million different ways. Do you think about kind of looking at older videos and seeing, okay, like I really like this in the video, maybe I could present this in a new way, versus like coming up with a new original concept or tutorial or idea? Because I think that if you go the original route, I think it's much easier to get burnt out, because like if we're being completely honest, like it's kind of hard to come up with a new video tutorial or original idea every week.
Exactly. And I was actually thinking about this the other day with some of the videos I've made, where I touch on like 3 things, and then in those 3 points I have 3 mini points, and I think when you're someone who's just starting out, being overwhelmed by all that knowledge or information, you can shut your brain off and forget about it all, right? So I have thought about, in some of these older videos, like there's points that I don't really go in depth on, and I could just make a quick 4-minute video just about that point, and it could possibly do really well. And I'm really struggling with, is it better to go longer form, like 10, 9, 8-minute videos, or is it better to go 5, 4, 6-minute videos? Like I just don't know what it is. And I hear guys on YouTube, they're like, always go for 10 minutes because you can fit in more ads, it's better for the algorithm, a slew of reasons. And even their audience asks for longer videos. So I do struggle with trying to figure out how to come up with original ideas that are interesting without, forcing myself and squeezing myself dry of all energy, because I just don't want to stop. Like I cannot stop, or else I don't think, like, I really get scared sometimes of not finishing videos on time and taking a whole week off, because I am a person who works a lot in momentum, and if I lose my momentum, like, I can really fall off the rails. So it's been a tough balance for sure to do podcasts and this, and stay original. But that's why I lean on like you and like other friends. Be like, I don't know what to do with an idea. Like, let's chat, and you're always there to help. So it's
And
tough.
in that situation that you're talking about, I think that when you start something like this, you definitely do underestimate kind of the day-to-day pressure or week-to-week pressure of actually putting something out, because it's not really a thought. Like, you just make the first video and then you're like, okay, I'll make one next week. But after you are 4 to 6 weeks into it, maybe you're doing it for a month or two, I think that's when that tension and that pressure really starts building up. So from
Well,
what
it's
I
not week
just
to
heard you
week.
say,
It's day to day.
it's
Like,
day to
it's
day, exactly.
every
It's
day. You're
making the
like,
video and the pressure of trying to produce something that you think is good.
yeah. And also, you're outward facing. People are watching you, express yourself. And in my head, sometimes I get in my head and go, like, no one wants to watch this, or like, why am I forcing this down people's throats, or whatever. Like, it is a bit embarrassing in a way, but I don't know. I think it's necessary if you're a
Yeah,
creative.
absolutely. I think that kind of the emotional challenge that you're speaking to there is that when you start these kind of things, I think in your own head, people, especially your friends, kind of have an expectation of how you're gonna like act and behave. And when you start something new, it's almost like you're going against that expectation. And I think that just kind of really high level as human beings, I think we're all kind of wired to not step into the unknown and kind of just manage the load that we have. So there's definitely some inertia there. I think to your point, momentum is really important. Here's where I want to kind of pick back up on this thread of are short videos better, are longer videos better, with this really great example. I think David Dobrik's kind of the king of YouTube. I will pull up a tweet after this. He just released a video on his second channel with Borat, and it's currently like #1 on trending. He's got millions and millions of views, and it kind of just speaks to his audience and kind of the need for his content, even though he took 6 months off. So let's go back to this idea of, okay, what's better? It's kind of longer 10-minute video or something shorter. So David Dobrik's a vlogger, right? He posts a weekly vlog. That's how he kind of made his name for himself. And I think it's really important to think about the context of when he was doing it. So I'm not sure exactly on the year when he started, but at the time, every YouTube vlog was about 10 minutes, because if your video was longer, or no, it was at least 10 minutes, and it was usually longer. And this is why. If it was longer than 10 minutes, YouTube allows creators to insert not just that pre-roll ad on the front of your video, but also kind of ads in between. So making your video longer than 10 minutes was really kind of a tactical choice to squeeze the most advertising dollars out of your videos. But Dobrik, sorry, took a completely different approach, right? His videos were only 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Obviously, yes, that's a nod to 420, but it was deeper than that. He kind of saw that there was a bunch of white space for creating a shorter video, because with you can definitely speak to this, you would know it better. I think the longer the video, the more kind of room for fluff there is. I will give the example. We had to write a kind of essay to get into our program, and I saw that and I was like, oh, I'm a great writer. This is something that kind of comes naturally to me. I'm going to bang this out of the park. And then we kind of saw it had to be 250 words. And that's when you realize that the shorter the content is, whether that's an essay or a video, the more precise that you have to be in terms of packing value in there, because there's really no room for fluff, and there's no room for content and information that doesn't surprise and that isn't valuable. Here's kind of the overarching point. I think that one, if you want to kind of think about what's better, short form or long form, what should I optimize for, what length should my videos be, I think it's almost more important to take the first step of seeing, okay, if I think about the specific niche that I'm kind of competing in and like who else is making videos, really look at kind of what the incentives are there. So with the Dobrik example, right? Like I mentioned, there was an incentive to make your video longer than 10 minutes because you got more advertising money for that. But at the flip side of that, for a new person coming in, that left this huge amount of white space if you could make a more entertaining product in shorter. I think, kind of as a general rule of thumb, shorter content does better because there's less of a time commitment to clicking on the video. And if you can pack a bunch of valuable or entertaining information in a shorter kind of capsule, that's an opportunity where I think that you can kind of separate your content. And the bigger question is really always like, why are people, there's so much content out there, like, what can I bring to my video or my product that other people can't kind of compete on?
Well, I also think on top of what you're saying, it's important to look at where Dobrik came from. Vine, that user demo, very young, and when
Very
he
young.
transitioned to YouTube, they follow, and they're quite young, and mainly girls. This is anecdotal. I was in New York like a couple of years ago, just traveling, and I was biking down the Lower East or like down the financial district, and then I just hear like roars of cheers and like girls screaming. I'm like, what the fuck's going on? I'm like biking through, and then I find like the little alleyway, and it's just Dobrik on this like fire escape. You know, like the classic New York fire
Yeah.
escapes that go up the side of
Big
buildings.
city.
And there was maybe 200 girls jammed in this tiny little street corner, and he's just throwing out clickbait merch, just like, what's up guys, he's getting filmed. It was pandemonium, and it was like all young girls. So I look at that, he probably has people analyzing his audience, and they go like, okay, what kind of content are these people watching? Do they like shorter stuff or do they like longer stuff? How do I get more of these people on as viewership? Because like we said, audience is currency. I think it's more important that we get a larger viewer base than it is to get more ad money out of a longer video, and that's the trade-off you make.
Mm-hmm.
And in business, there's all sorts of trade-offs, and I think depending on what you are, what you want to do, sometimes sacrificing extra cash with shorter videos, I think pays off longer term. And you can use that larger audience to make up for that loss of cash in other avenues of revenue, such as merch, live shows, which are all dependent on user base that will buy.
Mm-hmm. And kind of the bigger point that you're kind of hinting at, I would say, is that building that kind of direct relationship with your audience has become kind of more important than ever. And I think the quickest way to kind of build that up, whether you're looking for scale and you're an entertainer and you want kind of the biggest fan base, or you're something a little bit more niche, where I think with that educational content on YouTube, you're almost not looking to become the next Schiffer or Peter McKinnon or any of these creators. I think that almost focusing on that like first 1,000 people, those diehard fans, and that niche is almost more important, because we're coming to a place with technology and this internet thing where if you can build a direct relationship with 1,000 people, you don't need massive scale anymore. And those 1,000 people are kind of willing to pay for a video or pay for a course or however you kind of choose to monetize that. Like you could make a living off much less of an audience than I think most people believe they can. I have one more thing I want to wrap with, because we talked about short form and long form. And I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that people make is that, Gen Z and everyone that kind of comes after us, especially these younger kids, they think that kind of the attention span and the willingness to consume something has gotten shorter and shorter. And I would kind of push back on that if I could say one last thing. I don't think that attention spans have got shorter necessarily. I just think that the expectation for ROI, return on investment, has gotten higher, like per minute almost. Like if you can't grab somebody in the first 30 seconds to a minute of your video, like I don't think there's a real incentive for them to stick around. So regardless of how long your video is, I think what matters most at the end of the day is like, if you look at your video minute by minute, like, is there something in that minute or something in that point that it's going to incentivize people to stick around? And if there's not, then, make it shorter, or kind of think about how you can present the information in a more compelling way. Because it's not length anymore. It's really like value, I guess, and how entertaining or um, how entertaining or how, I don't want to use valuable twice, but it's
No, it's just how able you are to pique someone's interest. Like if
Exactly.
people are losing interest faster than they were and they're less patient, like it is on you, the creator, to address that market issue and create content where every minute there's a new thing that's piquing interest.
Exactly.
And I talked about that in my videos. When you make a sport edit or whatever, create several peaks and valleys and climaxes in that 30-second 1 minute, because you have to keep people in. Everyone's just scrolling and consuming. There has to be more than just like a really slow build up into a massive drop. People are not interested.
No. You have to give people a reason to stay on your video within the first 30 seconds.
Maybe less.
Maybe less.
60 no wait,
You
60
went the other
seconds,
way.
that's
15
doesn't make any
seconds.
sense. I meant to say like 10 seconds, 5 seconds, but yeah. All right, that's I think everything for this week's episode. Mose, why don't you plug your Instagram? I feel like we haven't been doing that. We should probably plug the podcast Instagram and our Instagrams, Twitter and whatnot. So why don't you take that away and I'll do the podcast one.
Yeah, so well, I don't know if it makes much sense. I'm not posting on Instagram a whole ton these days,
Well, you
but
got a new display picture, the flex. He's got the
I'm keeping
tricep
the
flex
fan base
going.
waiting. Everyone's expecting this post. I don't know what's going to come out, but it'll be a banger. I've sat on a couple actually. I think people should know that.
Well, is
Where I
it
was like,
personal posts or is
maybe
it?
I shouldn't post this because it's not a great look if I look back on this in 5 years. But there's definitely more content coming. Like you mentioned, I do write, so I have a Substack that I kind of write weekly for. To our point earlier with republishing some of your older content, I think there's so much value in there that you can kind of extract. So we'll be making kind of shorter posts. I think that'll do really well. And a lot of that content is actually going to be running or rolling out rather on our Instagram. We're kind of focusing on doing more short form stuff there. So tons of content, whether it's quote graphics or videos coming your way.
Awesome. And you can follow me at will.j. That's at WIILL.j. Two eyes. And our
Trendy,
pod. What's that?
trendy,
I'm
hipster.
very trendy. Or is it just that I couldn't get just one eye? Because people get confused and it's super
Well,
annoying.
you could buy the handle for 10K, but maybe that's a
Yeah.
discussion for later.
Yeah, I got the savings. And then you can follow our podcast at RnR Repeat Podcast on Instagram and Twitter. Give it a follow. We got more content like Mose is saying, and we're gonna try and spice things up in there. Get talking with you guys. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say in the comments, and we'll see you next week. Ciao,
Ciao.
bello.